Good morning, or perhaps good afternoon to you, wherever you may be. My name's Val from Alan Heath, and I'm joined by my colleague Jack.
Hi there, nice to meet you all.
So thanks very much for joining our webinar today. Today we are talking about dLive and more specifically using dLive in theatre and musical theatre. So we've got a nice program today. We are very fortunate to have had a really interesting interview with Andrew Crawford, who is not only our product specialist at our distributor in Australia, but he's also an esteemed and very experienced engineer who mixes in a lot of live music, but also theatre and classical music. So we'll share that interview with you in a few minutes. We do have a question box, and I already see some comments coming in. So morning, hi Karen. So please, all through the session, don't hesitate to ask your questions, and we'll do our very best to answer those towards the end of the webinar. So before we start the interview, Jack is going to talk through some of the specs of dLive, just if there are some new attendees, people who are not necessarily familiar with dLive, just for 5 minutes talk you through sort of the channel counts and stuff like that. So everyone's on the same page, and then we'll go on after that. So I will hand over to Jack, and he can talk you through those details.
Thanks so much. I'm just going to make sure that I'm showing the right screen, so I don't think I am. There we go. Can everyone see a dLive on their screen at the moment? Looking for Val to confirm to me that he can.
Good to me.
Perfect. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about what dLive is. For people who are maybe a little bit newer to the platform, you might think, well, this is the console, this is dLive, and you're partially right. You're partially right in that this is the dLive control surface, but no processing goes on here. Really, the heart of a dLive system is here. The mix rack is the mixer. So the mix rack has all the processing, all the audio processing for sure, that happens in the dLive system. This is the brain, this is the heart, and this is the mixer. So what do you do with a mix rack? Well, you'll need to control it, and the primary way you'll control a mix rack is through a surface. And this is its most basic is a dLive system. You have a surface, which is the controller, and you have a mix rack. But a surface isn't the only way to control a mix rack. There are actually a number of different options. You can use an iPad, you can use a computer running Director software, which runs on Windows and Mac, or you can use one of the IP controllers. So we have the IP8, the IP6, and the IP1, and there's information about all of these things on our website. But the point I'm making here is there are many different ways to control a mix rack. It's not just a surface, and you don't have to have a surface. You can control a mix rack just with a laptop or just with an iPad, etc., if you're doing maybe a smaller show. So how does this work in practice? Well, we have our mix rack and we have our surface, and we need to connect the two together. Now, depending on which mix rack you have and which surface you have, there might be some slight differences, but in all configurations, you'll use the GigaRace connection to connect a surface to a mix rack. Now, that's as simple as using a bit of Cat5e to connect the two together. It has to be shielded, has to support gigabit Ethernet, but apart from that, it's just a standard bit of networking equipment. Now, in a C-class system, you just use GigaRace A. In an S-class system, which supports full redundancy, you can use two cables to get these together. There are some more options which I won't go into right here, including using fiber and other connections like that, but generally speaking, for connecting a surface to a mix rack, you'll use GigaRace. And when you're connecting other things, such as iPads or IP8 controllers, you'll use the network port. Now, what's different about GigaRace versus the network port? Well, GigaRace not only carries the control from the surface to the mix rack, but it also bulk carries audio. On the back of the surface, there's a number of analog I/O, some AES, and also 2 of our option card slots, which I'll touch on in a little bit more detail in just a moment. So the GigaRace connection carries all of the audio that's going in and out of the surface. But it's important to note that it's just an endpoint. You know, the actual mixing, the processing is happening in the mix rack. So what do you get with a mix rack? Well, all mix racks can process 128 channels of audio. They have 64 fully configurable mix buses, 16 stereo effects engines, 586 inline dynamics, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in just a moment, and some third-party protocol card slots. Well, what does that mean? Well, in terms of inline dynamics, we have our deep plug-in emulations or deep processing emulations, which include emulations of classic compressors and GEQ emulations, things like that. Third-party protocol card slots, well, we also support Dante, Waves, and MIDI. There are a number of different options. You can also fit those card slots with AES cards, and more DXIO. DXIO we'll touch on in a minute when we talk about everything IO. But just really trying to hammer home the idea that this is where you connect everything. This is the center of the system. What else is in the mixer? Well, all that processing is done by our own FPGA technology, which we call XCVI. XCVI is our own FPGA technology that we've built in-house. This is capable of processing all of those channels with a 0.7 millisecond input to output latency. One of the great things about the technology that we use is it allows us to keep all of your input to output coherent. And what do I mean by this? Well, anything you use inside the channel strip, such as a deep plugin, adds no additional latency. All that latency is reserved in the chain. So if you're going from input to main, that will have exactly the same latency as input through a compressor, through a gate, through a group to the main. It's stuff like that. So it keeps all of your I/O completely in phase from input to output. There are a few exceptions if you really, really want to make the console work hard, but generally speaking, this is true. As if to hammer it home further, that's 0.7 millisecond latency from input to output. So I did touch on this a little bit earlier, but we have our S-class range and our C-class range. So the S-class is the fully featured, sort of maybe more professional range, whereas C-class is a little bit more budget friendly. So there are some differences between these two ranges. The S-class range has a 3-year manufacturer's warranty, while the C-class range has just a 1-year manufacturer's warranty. We also have a number of hardware differences. The S-class range has redundant power supplies and redundant audio networking. That includes the GigaRace connections, DX connections, which are used for expansion boxes, which we'll touch on a little bit more in a few slides. The S-class consoles also have a little bit more in the way of interface. So you have a little bit more in terms of hardware encoders. You'll see from the two images that the console on the left has a number of additional rotary encoders around the screen, whereas the C-class is pared down to really just the things you absolutely need. So let's talk about the range. So this is showing this is showing all of the S and C class services. So we have 3 S class surfaces. We have the S7000, which is the largest one, which has 3 banks of 12 faders. We have the S5000, which is a bank of 12 faders and 2 banks of 8 faders, and the S3000, which has 1 bank of 12 and 1 bank of 8 faders. You'll notice that of the S class range, the only one without 2 screens is the S3000. In the C class range, we have the C3500, which is our dual screen C-class console, which is the one on the left front there. We have the C2500, and then we have our 19-inch rack mount C1500. There is also another console in the range, which is the CTI 1500, which is exactly the same as the 1500, but with additional weight savings to get it comfortably under carry-on luggage weight limits for fly shows. In the S-Class mix rack range, we have 4 mix racks, and one of them is a little bit different to the others. So the 32, 48, and 64 all feature 3 card slots, 2 slots for redundant power supplies and redundant audio networking. And then they have, the 32 has 32 inputs, well, it has 16 outputs. The 48 has 14 inputs and 24 outputs, and the 64 has 64 XLR inputs and 32 XLR outputs. What's worth noticing is all of these have exactly the same internal processing. So using external card slots such as MIDI and Dante, you can still get the full 128 channels into all of these mix racks. And you can expand the analog I/O, which we'll talk about in a minute, up to the full 128 with any of these mix racks. The DM0, which is the one on the left, is slightly different. It doesn't have any analog I/O. So this is really useful if you need maybe an extra console for broadcast where you're going to be sending all of the audio over something like Dante, or maybe using it as a matrix mixer, something like that, where it can be put into a small space. You'll notice that while this mix rack does have redundant power supplies, they're fixed internally, so you can't hot swap the ones on the DM0. The C-class mix racks do not offer redundant networking, but still have one networking I/O port for something like Dante or MIDI, and have exactly the same sort of breakdown of inputs and outputs. So again, just like S-Class, all of the C-Class mix racks can still process 128 channels of audio, still have 64 mix outputs, and still have 16 rack effects. So they have exactly the same processing, but just a little bit have slightly different and tweaked I/O options. Well, talking of I/O, let's go through everything I/O. So the everything I/O concept essentially incorporates all of our different options for getting audio in and out of the console. So some of our I/O concepts, or some of the I/O protocols work with any console. So we have the DT range, which use Dante, and that Dante audio can obviously be sent to any console that supports Dante, whereas the DX is something that we've developed in-house to be super low latency, super reliable. If we have a look at S-Class connection, you can see how much distributed I/O we can get into these consoles. So this diagram just shows that there are actually 48 different I/O points using the DX hub, which allows you to connect up to 8 DX16.8s to each port on the mix rack. In this configuration, we're using GigaAce cards to connect to the DX hubs. This is probably an entire presentation on its own, so I'm not going to go into an awful lot of detail about this particular concept. But the point to take away here is that there are lots of options for connecting lots of different boxes to your console. In a C-Class configuration, you can still use a lot of endpoints, but given it has slightly less I/O ports, there are slightly less options in terms of the max number of boxes you can connect to the console. And with that, I shall hand back to Val.
Thank you very much, Jack. So yeah, the point of that is really so that everyone who's attending today has a good understanding of what's possible with dLive in terms of I/O, in terms of channel counts, etc. But also, because we're talking about musicals, how flexible the platform can be in terms of I/O. So you can distribute your I/O boxes, you know, whether it's in your orchestra pit with your wireless microphones, and we'll touch on that with our interview in a couple of minutes. But it really is extremely flexible, not just in terms of I/O, but also in terms of control, because as Jack mentioned, you can have a surface to mix the audio, but you might have an iPad for someone to do PFL checks and stuff like that, or to support mixing monitors. So really a very flexible platform, very well suited for theatre applications. So as I mentioned just at the beginning, and I've already got some questions coming in, we did have the opportunity earlier this week to speak with Andrew Crawford, who is a very highly experienced engineer out of Australia. Luckily for us, we happen to also use his services as our product specialist at Tag, our distributor in Australia. But he shared some of his experience of using dLive in musical theatre. So I'm going to play that interview for you now for about 20 minutes. And during the interview, please don't hesitate to, again, keep asking your questions, and we'll do our best to get to those just after the interview. So with that, I will launch the video. I need to make sure I get the right one. There we go. Thanks very much. Hi everyone, today I'm very happy to have a nice chat with our friend in Australia, Andrew Crawford. Hi Andrew, how's it going?
Yeah, great, great. Night time here, but nice and early in the morning for you guys.
It
So
is, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Fantastic. So, we've got a few questions for you, and as you are the honorary mix wizard from your YouTube videos that we greatly appreciate, I'm sure you've got lots of experience to share with us. So first of all, maybe you can introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're from, and your background.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm the honorary mix wizard because I think the official title goes to Harry from Alan and Heath. He is the original mix wizard, and he had legendary status. So I'm happy to be the number two man. But yes, I'm obviously an Aussie, work for the Australian distributor down here called TAG, Technical Audio Group. And I have a background in mixing a myriad of shows. Live theatre work is one of the things that I still do as well. So I am the product specialist here for Alan and Heath, supporting the product, but also supporting the brand as well by being out actively doing shows. It's something that was really important to TAG here, that they have someone in the role that mixes shows every year. And to be honest, it is the best way to learn all of the hidden things about the console and how to get the most out of it. Because then I can pass that on and teach other people how to get the most out of their consoles.
Sure. So as you mentioned, you do a fair bit of theatre and musical theatre, and a lot of our users come from a live music background. In your experience, what are there specific challenges related to musical theatre compared to live, where maybe the workflow or the technical aspects of the product change a little bit? How would you highlight some of the challenges?
Yeah, live theatre. Obviously, once you go to the live mixing a band, you can have a lot of input still with band shows, but predominantly it's a couple of vocals and you're managing the music content. Once you get to musical theatre, you're managing the musical content of potentially some very complex musical scores, depending on the show, but you're managing 30 odd radio mics, dialogue, people on and off stage, different performances, which happen within a band, but normally when it's a lead vocalist, you don't have, you know, some scenes in a musical theatre show, you've got, 9, 10, 11 people singing the one song. They're singing like a line each. And you've got to keep that balance every night. I find musical theatre shows are very enjoyable, but very taxing. Normally, by the end of mixing a theatre show, I'm very brain dead. I'm ready just to talk with anyone, but just the concentration level is very
Yeah.
high. So yeah,
Okay, so typically
um,
sort of high channel counts, and then you really have to be on it the whole time. You don't get a second where you can think about what you're going to have at catering after the show, or I don't know. Yeah,
no, not at all. Not on a theatre show. And once you miss a cue, um, finding where you are in the script. On complex shows, you might have someone that's just reading the script for you and turning pages. Um, yeah, depending how complex that show gets.
sure.
Um, yeah.
Okay, and so we're talking about dLive today, specifically when you're talking about really high channel counts where you might have uh, 20, 30, maybe more wireless mics plus an orchestra, plus sound effects maybe coming from cues. How do you manage your workflow, to be able to move around really quickly on dLive? What's your approach to that?
Yeah, the spill groups. Spill groups on DCAs are an incredibly great feature to get around the surface really quickly. An example, when I'm mixing a theatre show, I will break up the cast, so I'll have leads in a DCA, so I can hit that DCA and I can just instantly have the lead microphones. I can also have ensemble cast, boys, ensemble cast, girls. Those will change per snapshot, okay? But at any stage, I hit that DCA that says male cast, and all of the male singers are right in front of me. No matter where I am in the console, that helps you be super fast. Same thing, I can spill my strings on woodwinds, my brass, hit any of those DCAs, and you have all of those contributions there. That, along with, and I'll talk about a little bit later because I know it was one of the questions that we sort of talked about, but the ability to also, within every snapshot, now this is more programming, change your layout. That is something on the dLive that really helps you get around fast because it puts in front of you when you hit go. You've only got exactly what you need in that snapshot.
Sure. Okay. So it's really related to how customizable the surface is to suit which part of the show you're in, who you need to see.
Definitely. And another example is the custom rotaries. Okay, I will always have custom rotary 1 for me is always the stage foldback. So as soon as the cast, I never have to go away from my faders. Yeah. And I'll hit the button that sends on fader, but on the custom rotaries. So you just hit that button and, custom rotary 1, and, straight away, I've always got a very quick access to turn things up and down in a stage fallback, but I never lose faders in front of me.
And then maybe on a more technical or hardware side of things, obviously, if you've got high channel counts, that kind of describes that you're going to have a high number of inputs that you need, physical XLR inputs. So how would you typically distribute I/O with the dLive system? What sort of system are you usually touring or using on shows?
Yeah, so definitely, it's a DM48 or a DM64, and definitely the Xboxes normally is the standard. The brain is down in the pit with the orchestra because straight away my ME port is there. And if it's a DM48, that's 48 inputs, or DM64, it's 64 inputs, and it's in the pit, very close to all of the source of that. Okay. And then normally I run DX168, so to one stream of Cat5, 2 DX168, that's 32 inputs right there for the radio mics. Again, a very small footprint, on a Cat5 run. And with that, I also get a whole bunch of outputs at my radio mic land. So I can now feed some talkback speakers, maybe because that's where that's positioned on the stage near a stage management console. It's some back of house feeds and some things like that. So the DX16 gets a huge use for that.
Jack, over to you.
Yeah, so we talked the last time we spoke about a Qlab and how you use Qlab sort of in your shows. Could you just go through a little bit about how you set it up, what's triggered, what's going from maybe console to Qlab, what's maybe going from Qlab to the console?
Yeah, definitely. Qlab obviously is one of the most used for sound effects, etc. It is a Mac platform, and obviously the dLive talking MIDI over IP. It's super simple to set up. It's a Cat5 between your Mac computer and your dLive, and you just download the little Alan and Heath app that allows it to talk MIDI over IP. Set that up, follow the instructions, punch in the IP of the mix rack, and you're away. That allows you. So it's hex of the console. So it allows you to do a couple of things. You can fire Qlab cues as part of a snapshot. So you might say Snapshot, 105. When I hit go on that scene, that's going to fire this QLab sound effect, as well as moving some faders at the same time and things. The other thing you can do is you can assign on the soft keys sound effects. So it might be a soft key button, soft key 12, and you can utilize that to fire a sound effect. Something about the soft keys, which a lot of people don't realize when you're in MIDI trigger mode, it's got a trigger when you press, and it's got another trigger when you release. So that can be two different cues, which is really helpful. So that's how I delineate. So that would be a cue that's a soft key. Then a cue that's part of a snapshot normally has got faders moving and other elements, and it's involved with a scene, So that's how I delineate those kind of sound effects.
So do you find for what you do that you're most controlling QLab with the console as opposed to the way around?
Definitely. Yeah, there's not. Okay, if it's a show that is actually got, let's put, tracks being played off QLab. So maybe a Mamma Mia or a show like that where the band has got, backing track support, then yes, you've got the ability, and I've definitely done this, where you can put the cues in QLab and it's firing your snapshots for you, which is unreal. Now it's one less thing you're thinking about. But you have to be working on a show that the MD, the musical director, is already running backing track elements.
Yeah.
So it may be the time code and lighting and chasing as well, but they've got to be, the band has to be playing with some kind of click track, following something. I've done that out of Reaper and Pro Tools and other things as well.
That's quite cool. So that's one way to control the console. Fairly recently we brought custom control to dLive.
Yes.
Do you use that? Is that something you use in that environment? And if so, how?
Yeah. So I've been using custom control, which is unreal. I tell everyone that, if your console doesn't do this, why not? So the custom control, I basically go with a little interface that has, let's say, 24 buttons or 32 buttons on it. And we use that as the radio monitoring station. So it's backstage. And for those of you unaware, in dLive, you can have multiple PAFL buses. So I go and set up a secondary PAFL bus. So it's not using the one that's already assigned to the console. And that iPad now has 20 buttons on it. I also put the volume meter on it. So you can see the volume, you can see the radio mic is working. That visual representation is excellent because sometimes you can see that one's, you can see it flickering and you go, oh, okay, that's crackling. You can press the button. Again, to one of the DX168 boxes, I feed that as the PAFL bus. That could do an IEM transmitter or a little powered speaker. And now you have radio mic monitoring without having a secondary console. It's so elegant. And when it's an iPad, running wirelessly, and the person is on a wireless belt pack, so they can then walk around and hear, they're now a remote radio mic tech. And they can carry the iPad, they can stand beside a stage, fix someone's radio mic that's broken, solo it right there, and then the cast member goes back on stage. It's an absolute game changer, I call it. Yeah.
Smart. I love it. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So obviously, with all those mics to manage, I understand that you do employ AMM. Do you want to just speak a little bit about how you integrate that into your workflow, you use it, what works well?
Yeah. So again, for those that are unaware, dLive has got automatic mic mixers built in. And it's something that you can, so there is 64 channels worth of automatic mic mixer in the dLive platform. And you can split that up into 4 16 channels, 232s and 164, correct? Yes.
Yes.
I had to think there for a second. I normally, I see, because I only ever use it, I normally use it as 416s or 232s. And I split the cast up. So normally I'll have lead cast in one automatic mixer, and then I have the ensemble cast secondary automatic mic mixer. And for dialogue, it is, again, it is such a useful tool to help you do your job better, you know. The very first show I started using it, everyone came up and went, wow, you know, you're really on those cues, don't miss anything. And and I'm sitting there, grin on my face going, I pushed the faders up and the automatic mic mixer's doing its job.
You're using the tool to the best of your ability.
Yeah, and that's smart, because then I focus on other things, which is excellent. So I snapshot that in. When it comes to a song, I bypass it. I also put the bypass on a couple of soft keys, just in case. I call that my get out of jail free card.
Nice.
If I don't like what the automatic mic mix is doing, or something's happened in the show, I can just press those soft keys and bypass it. The other thing I do, and again, I don't know if people are aware of this, you can put the automatic mic mixer down in front of you in your customized space in your Windows. You can put it where your VUs, where your input metering is in the bottom of your screen there. So I pretty much always create that as one of my views, and you can toggle between, seeing your inputs, outputs, or the automatic mic mixer. Yeah, I love it. The dialogue, it's incredibly helpful.
Sure. What personally, what I really like about the AMM is, I think some people don't necessarily use it because they see it, but they think, oh, I don't have time to set it all up, or even if they're using it for conference or corporate work or something like that, they think, oh, but I never get the guy on stage long enough to dial it in. But actually, I find that most of the time, you don't have to. So from where it starts, just when you put stuff onto it, it's already in a good starting place. And then you can tweak it and fine tune it a bit. But I really like the fact that, yeah, just switch it on and it does a lot of the job for you.
Yeah, it's so fast. Literally, I don't play with it. So I normally use the D classic algorithm in this instance. I normally use the other algorithm for doing court work, but in theater, I've had the most success with the D classic. And yeah, it opens and closes those mics. It brings back down your whole noise level of having 16 open or 24 open headsets on stage. And yeah, I don't tend to play with the priority levels. As long as you have a good, healthy gain structure in your desk where your mics are actually, up at zero, not a, just one light LED blinking, a good, healthy gain structure. And it just, as you said, Val, it actually just does its job, works. So yeah, it's beautiful.
Cool. So you mentioned that you put things like AMM bypass on your soft keys. Are there any other like really neat things that you use on your soft keys that people might not necessarily think about out of the gate, or anything like that?
I might do. Sometimes I'll do like a specific scene recall, maybe. Even like halftime show and things like that. I do always the very bottom button is the go button.
Okay.
It's quite when I'm programming, I use the controls on the surface. But the way I set up my script is right down there, nice and low, on a script holder. And so yeah, that bottom button on the surface, that becomes my go button. Yeah, normally again there'll be a few sound effects there. There will be all my auxiliaries. So
Okay.
again, just because I'm anally retentive, like auxiliary 1 will be fallback 1, fallback 2. Any of those things will be there. Yeah, same with any verbs. I'll program a bunch of things that are quick to get to.
Sure.
Again, I will, depending on the show, sometimes there might be some mutes. There'll be some specific channel mutes
Okay.
that I just need to get to. You know, maybe it's like in Shrek, it was opening and closing his roar. His roar sound effect just the whole time.
Okay.
It was actually active the whole time, and there was just a mute button that you could just go, oh, I want the roar, I don't want the roar, you know. So some things like that, yeah. Again, the soft, they're hugely useful. I need to get to that, but I don't need a whole channel strip. I might just want, you know, the mute or, yeah,
Sure.
an element.
Sure.
So
And a bit earlier on, you mentioned DCA spills. Will you put a DCA spill on a soft key?
sometimes, yes, yep. So the other one sometimes, I don't do see this in theatre show, mixing a rock, jumping back to the rock band whole thing, you know, the select button of the lead vocal will normally be a soft key.
Okay.
So I can be anywhere I want and hit the select button, and I've got the EQ in front of me is the EQ strip for the compression for the lead vocal. Doesn't matter whether the fade is in front of me or not. I can, yeah.
Great. Fantastic.
Hmm.
And so it kind of relates to soft keys in a way. You're used to doing stuff on the biggest Surface, the S7000, but also on the more compact C1500 because there's a wide range of different surface sizes. How for you, if you have to take an S7000 show for whatever reason for travel purposes and mix on a more compact surface, how does that transition work for you?
Yeah, interestingly enough, all of last year, I purposely took the 3500 Surface on theatre shows. And to and I'll fess up here. I took two P8s on the first one and set them up, thinking, oh, I'm going to need more faders, aren't I?
Yeah.
And I didn't end up using them. Ironically, I ended up giving the IP8, one of them, to the MD.
Okay.
So he could actually control a couple of things, which was an excellent tool. But 3500 Surface with faders, with the DCA spills, I found that was absolutely perfect. The theatre loved it because the footprint is so
Of course.
small, you know. There's a couple of
back on
seats.
sale.
And yeah, I actually really enjoyed mixing on it. So I probably haven't overly answered your question but I find all the surfaces, because of the customizability,
Very good.
whatever the correct word is there.
Pretty sure that's the word.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can very easily, set up ways of spilling your channels. And as I sort of said this before, the ability per snapshot for your layout to change is,
Yeah.
it's hugely powerful.
And even to an extent, even if you're not going through different parts of the show, you could set up snapshots where everything's filtered except for your layout. So if you're before the show, you want to do some of your distribution tuning, for example, just setting up your front fills and your delays and what have you, your subs, but you don't need to touch that at all during the show. You could just have a scene that you recall that only shows you your output matrices, and that's it, and then disappear them again afterwards. So
yeah. And again, that could be a soft key. You also have a soft key that's recalling that scene, which it's like, oh, cool. I want to look at my PA outputs. Soft key, you jump to that, and then you can then still go back to when you hit next, it's still going to fire you to the next snapshot in your actual scenes. So, yeah.
Sure. Great. And I have a last question for you, but it's maybe the toughest or the more subjective. If you had to name one favorite feature of the dLive system, maybe one for technical or hardware side and one for workflow. Have you got anything, or maybe some of the deep processors or something like that?
Oh no, there's a bunch. When you stop and look at it, yes, if we talk about deep, I will use a multiband on all the vocals. Maybe when you cast the change in and out, that multiband again is just an amazing tool, and very quick. For me, workflow wise, it's that the ability to do your snapshots and snapshots
Sure.
changing your layout. It's anyone, whenever I do a show, the first time someone actually experienced that, and I'm working with someone else who's mixed theatre shows before, and suddenly the 4 mics are in front of them. They hit next, and then that goes from 4 mics to 6 mics, and then you hit next, and then it's 2 mics. 2 mics and a violin, because the violin's the feature instrument. It blows their mind. They're like, oh. So, and you can still have, interestingly enough, I do that normally on the very bottom layer. You can still have other things in order in your top layers, and those layers don't change. The only layer that's ever changing is your bottom layer. Yeah, you know, we touched on as well the custom control apps. The fact that it's not an additional expense and the power that that can give you. I've only scratched on the surface there. We did another theatre show where I built a custom control app and put it down at stage, and it was actually firing QLab and firing video cues that was going to the video content on stage via dLive. So yeah, it was all fully integrated, and that was utilizing custom control app. So it's an amazing feature set or tool. Let's call it a cool. It's an amazing tool that you get with the console platform that you've not spent any more money on. You know, it's just a bit of your time to create the app. Yeah, and the flexibility. You know, I'll give you a couple other little tidbits. You know, I've done complex shows where maybe I've set up direct to PC, or I've brought in a surface that we've stuck in the orchestra pit to run sound checks. And it's only there for the 2 nights of sound checks to get the orchestra up and running, and then we take it away. The versatility of the dLive platform to do those kind of things for you is cool.
Great. Yeah. So clearly, customizability is definitely high on your list then.
Yeah.
Great. Well, in that case, Andrew, all I can do is thank you very much for sharing some of your insight and information with us, and also say thanks to you for all of your MixWizard videos that people can watch at their leisure, because there's a huge value and a huge amount of information for people to learn more about our platforms as well. So thank you very much for joining us, and hope to see you soon.
Awesome. No, thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Okay, so we are back. I really appreciated that exchange with Andrew, and he does have a wealth of information. If you want to watch some of his videos, if you search for The MixWizard on YouTube, you will find his channel. He's got a great series on there, and he touches on some of his favorite plugins, how he uses AMM. It's really thorough and lots of information to learn. So just The MixWizard, search for that on YouTube, and you'll find his channel straight away. We should have, yeah, Jack, you're back with us as well.
Hello.
Need to make you a presenter again. There we go. So Andrew talks about a few things during our interview. The first thing he talks about is DCA spills. So can you tell us a little bit how that works, the best way to set up DCA spills, how complex or maybe how simple that is to deploy, and how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just check that once again you can see director at the moment? Perfect.
Yeah,
I was just making sure that I'm, you know, not making a fool of myself. So I'm going to show you how to do DCA spills in director. Obviously, you can do this on the surface, and I will try and explain the differences between setting up DCAs in director and on the surface. So I've set up a few channels here. I've got some drums, I've got some stringed instruments, and I've got a brass section and some vocals. As you can see in vocal 1, I've got some SIG-gen running through just to try and explain what's going on here a little more. So there are 2 ways of setting up your DCAs. One is to press the mix button. So I'm going to right click on director on the mix key up here for DCA 1. Now, on a surface, you just press the mix button. There is an assign to mix button that you would press and hold, and you then press the mix key on each input you'd like to assign to the DCA. In Director, we don't have that press and hold system. We can select on for each channel that we'd like to send to the DCA. So for my first DCA, I'm going to do some drums. So let's just turn all my drums onto the DCA, and that's going to DCA 1. And then we can, if we select it, we can name that DCA drums. Now let's just quickly go through and do the others. There's another way to assign your DCA, and that's to press the mix key for the DCA you'd like to assign and press the routing button. Oh, sorry, press the select key and press the routing button, my apologies. So for this one, I'm going to do my bass and guitar, and I'm going to very quickly go to DCA 3 and do my brass section, and DCA 4 and do my vocals. What I usually do when I'm mixing is for the very last DCA, I assign all the effects buses, or returns rather, sends. So on DCA 7 here, I'm going to go to my effects sends and also select all my effects buses, which gives me a quick way to mute all the effects of one DCA. So I'm going to call this DCA effects. I'm going to select DCA 2, which was the guitar and bass. I'm just going to call that string. Ooh, if I can type. The next DCA was my brass, and DCA 4 was my vocals. So I now have DCAs with each of my sections in. So we'll notice if I go ahead and take this DCA, my vocals DCA, so you can see that vocal 1 has some SIGGEN coming into it. It's going into this DCA, and vocal 1 is currently going to my main bus, which you can see here. So if I were to reduce the vocal DCA, we can see that the vocal level, the send to the main bus drops. Notice that these faders don't move. So this is in addition to the channel faders. Now we've been talking about DCA spill. So what is DCA spill? DCA spill allows you to quickly see all the channels in a DCA. So if I go back to my left bank, I can see all my channels here. I'm going to go to Surface, Control, DCA MCA options, and enable spill active. You can bind this to a soft key as well if you find yourself wanting to turn spill on and off quickly. So now when we press the mix key for the DCA, the behavior will have changed. So if I were to right click on vocals up here, you'll see that my my first page changes just to show the vocal channels. Now in this example, it's not that useful because yeah, we've only got one page of channels, like we can just see everything. But you know, if you're mixing 60, 70, 80 or upwards channels, then having DCA spills is a really quick and easy way of just jumping in and getting straight to a channel. So you know, if I've got pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of inputs and I really need to get to that saxophone, well, I can press the mix key on my brass DCA and there's my saxophone, and I can immediately and quickly get control of it. There are a few different options in here. So we have right to left. So, you know, maybe you don't want to reach your arm all the way over to the left-hand side of the console. Do you know what? You know, maybe if you're mixing from something like a 7000 and you've got short arms like I do, that could be a genuine concern. So you can adjust that. You can change the order. So you can have the order of the channels in the channel list, or you can have the order of the strip layout, which in this example is exactly the same. Yeah, and that is a very brief introduction to DCA spills. Oh, Val's reappeared. Hi, Val.
Thank you, Jack. No, that's great, and it is a great tool. I'm often working on a C1500, which is just 12 faders, and once I've set up my my channels and I've routed everything to DCAs, quite often mixing a show, I will do it all from a single layer. So I'll just have my my DCAs, and I will just spill in and out of my DCAs, and I can manage everything from a single layer. So a really nice tool, and something to explore. And then the other thing, but which is kind of related to that in terms of channel layouts, is Andrew mentions that he will change his channel layout per scene. So we'll have a scene for each section of the event or for the musical, and he'll change the channel layout. So he can see different channels depending on which part of the show he's in. How do we set that up? My main question is, I want to make sure that I'm changing the channel layout, but that I'm not recalling changes to EQ or to compression or to processing in general. How do we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll do this through the scene system. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my scenes tab and create a new scene, which I'm going to call base, so I can get back to exactly where we are at the moment. So I've named it base, and I'm going to store it. What's important to note about the way our scene system works is every time you store a scene, you store all the information, and that's going to be really important in a minute, because that base scene has every single scene parameter saved to it. So everything you see in the filter is talking about filtering the recall, not filtering the save. So that base scene has everything in it. So if we want to be able to come back to that as a strip layout, but we don't want to change, for instance, the compressor settings or sends domains or anything like that, we need to filter it down. So we're going to press this button here, that's my recall filter, and we're going to block everything because you only want it to make a very specific change. So we can block everything, which will stop all of these things that you see here being recalled, and we want to just enable recall of the strip layout. So we're going to go into our recall filter, we're going to go to other, and here we have the option to unblock our strip assignments. So in this case, I want all of my strip assignments, but you may just want the left bank, you may want the right bank, you may want neither. On a 3-bank console, you may want the middle bank. So you can choose. In this example, I'm going to recall the entire strip layout, which will include the DCA's domains and the AUXs and things like that. It's really important to understand we're only recalling how these are displayed on the surface in this example because we've blocked everything else. If you didn't block everything else, you'd also be recalling other parameters. So let's apply that. And now we're going to make some changes. So we're going to go into surface, we're going to go into strip assign, and we can see our bank view down here. Now, this might be the first scene, but in the second scene, we might have maybe a solo of vocal 1 with a reduced band. So let's just get rid of everything and we'll bring in just the things we need. So we're going to have vocal 1. That's the most important thing that's going on. And maybe there's like a solo trombone in this scene. So we're going to have these two, and then maybe our effects DCA so we can quickly access maybe the reverb or something and control that with the DCA. So we can see this layout up here, and if I close the processing screen, we can see we've got our vocal 1, trombone, and the effects DCA. We can now save this as a scene, and we can call this scene 2. So we've stored it, which has stored everything to scene 2, and we're now going to take the recall filter we created here and copy it. Copy filter 2, scene 2, apply. So this recall filter will now only recall the strip assignments for these 2 scenes. So let's go to base scene and let's make some changes. So maybe I'm going to put my vocal to -3 dB, and my trombone to +3 dB ish. So you can see that I've made those 2 changes. When I go into my scenes and I recall scene 2, whilst the strip layout has changed, those fader positions are exactly the same because we've blocked those other parameters. Does that answer your question, Val?
That's fantastic, yes. And just to a follow-up question that we've had from Jordan, thanks Jordan, are the scene safe recall filter on the dLive like on the iLive assignable per scene?
They are. It's really important to understand that on the iLive, as I touched on earlier, you are saving, you're filtering what you're saving to the scene and filtering what's actually held in the scene, and that's not the way it works on dLive. And dLive, you're filtering what is recalled when you press go. But yes, it is per scene, but it's really important to understand that fundamental difference between the way iLive worked and the way dLive works.
Fantastic. So I've got another question. I'm going to tie 2 together here. One of the questions was, what's the workflow of triggering music or anything else in Qlab on dLive? And another question we had is it possible that a Grand MA lighting console can send MIDI to a dLive and change sorry, what's the rest of the question? And change snapshots or scene. So yes, it is. With Grand MA, I'm not a lighting engineer, unfortunately, so I'm not sure what the MIDI output capabilities are. But even if it's over a 5-pin MIDI port, there are converters that will take that to a network TCP/IP MIDI. Now on dLive, MIDI works over TCP/IP, so all of the MIDI commands coming from dLive and going to dLive are done over the control network ports. So to set that up with a Grand MA, you'll probably have a list of MIDI signals that are triggered for the Grand MA, and that can be translated to talk to a dLive. Now, whether that's done directly or via a computer is another question, and that brings us to the question of Qlab. Now, for Qlab to be able to recall scenes on dLive or vice versa, we need the dLive to be able to talk MIDI to the computer. Now, to do that, we need to, sorry, just changing my settings, there we go. We need to install our MIDI control driver, and you can do that by downloading that off our website. If you go to dLive and then software, just follow the link to the MIDI control 2.0 driver, and you install it onto your computer, and that installs a driver that's essentially converting the MIDI information from dLive to any piece of software on your computer, and that's how you can trigger MIDI events in Qlab or use Qlab to trigger MIDI events in dLive. Now, if you want to learn more, I'd encourage you to look for a YouTube video from my colleagues Heath and Alex, who did an in-depth MIDI tutorial, which is called Using MIDI with Your A&H Console. So if you search for that on YouTube, you should bring up a wealth of information on how to do that. And if you have more questions about configuring MIDI stuff with dLive, please don't hesitate to send us any questions in the question box, and we'll get back to you. Let me have another question. If you can tell us something about Timecode thing, what are the ways to integrate to dLive? Because a lot of musical shows might be running on Timecode. So I'm happy to cover that one. Timecode is essentially, I don't want to say an imaginary clock, but it's a clock that normally at the beginning of the show will start at 0, exactly like a wall clock, giving you the time. And it starts at 0, and events are triggered at given times. So say at 5 minutes and 10 seconds into the show, there will be a timecode event that will say, those lights come on, this scene change happens, and that scene is recalled on the mixing console to make microphones live. So timecode is generated by an external timecode source, and various different devices in the show, like your lighting console, your curtain control, your scene control, your mixing console, will all be synced to timecode to trigger events. Now, dLive does not have integrated timecode, but again, it can be triggered by something else running timecode. Typically, what people do is they will set up events in Qlab that are triggered by timecode. So at 4 minutes and 32 seconds, we need a scene recall on dLive to unmute the right channels. So the timecode event will be triggered in Qlab, and that will recall, will trigger a MIDI event in Qlab that will trigger new scenes on the dLive. So it is fully integratable in dLive. We just need to use a third-party app such as Qlab to trigger the events based on timecode. So thank you for that question, Andre. I think we've got time just for a quick last question. Oh, back to you, Jack, for a quick last question relating to layer recall. The question is, when we recall a layer assignment, does it only recall layer A, or does it recall layers B to F as well?
Yeah, so you can assign it by bank, so you can just recall the left-hand bank, but it is A to F on the entire bank. That is different to, yeah, exactly.
Okay, and then I've got one last question. Unfortunately, we've kind of run out of time to go into it in depth relating to custom control. The question is from Owen: is it possible to have multiple control layouts on a single console system, for instance, per user device? So really quickly before we come to an end of today's session, yes, a custom control, you can download it for free from our website if you want to look at the editor and the app, absolutely free. And the idea is that when you've designed a custom control layout, that is then uploaded inside the memory of the mixing console. So your layouts are stored inside the console themselves. When you then log in with a device, say an iPad, you'll log in with a user profile, a username and a password, and that will bring up the layout related to that user. So in the editor, you can assign one or multiple layouts to different users. So the engineer can have a custom control layout with scenery calls and maybe a couple of faders. The MD, for example, might have a different custom control layout on his device that is triggered from whatever user login he's used. So you can have multiple different layouts on a single console system. And in fact, you can go even further than that. You can design different layouts depending on whether your device is horizontal or vertical. So you might have a layout, which is when your iPad is horizontal, which has input faders for managing your lead vocal, your music, and something else. But when you turn it vertical, it changes the layout and it gives you output faders. So it might be your main PA matrix, your front fill, your sub, and your delays. So even one person can have different layouts on a single device, or loads of different devices with different layouts as well. Great. So thanks very much for your questions. Anything we haven't managed to cover, we will get back to you via email as soon as possible. Again, thanks, Jack, for joining me today for our session.
No problem at all.
For you. And we hope to be able to meet you in person as soon as physically possible. So thanks again. I'll leave the questions open for a few more minutes if you have anything else to ask. And with that, I wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye for now.